Welcome, Laina, Orlando.
All right. So welcome to part 4 of our Introduction to A Course in Miracles. And tonight we're going to focus on forgiveness. And before we get started on forgiveness, I just wanted to check in to see if anybody had any thoughts, anything about last week that you wanted to maybe address, just so that you can empty yourself of that, and then we can start fresh here. So if there's any lingering thoughts about anything we discussed last week. And welcome back to Lynn, and a few of you were not here last week, and thank you for coming. So let's jump into forgiveness. So to explain what forgiveness is all about, according to the Course in Miracles, it is really easiest and best to simplify it. And what I've done is I've done a list here on the board. Let me pull this up a little bit. I don't know if everybody's going to be able to see it there or not, but what I've done is create a list. And the reason I did this list is when you begin to sort out the thinking of the ego and the knowingness of God, you begin to see a very clear pattern. And as you begin to understand what God is, then everything that is an obstacle to that, a block to that, is what the ego is. So the ego in and of itself is nothing. It is a thought system. It is a thought that I am other than what I am. It is a thinking that blocks the will of God. And the reason it instills fear is because it blocks love. So for example, if you have a little kid playing in their room and they're there by themselves, and all of a sudden, let's say an older sibling is being mean and they go turn the lights off on the little kid, and all of a sudden they have light and light goes out, they get scared. Well, they got scared because it was an absence to the light. So in the darkness, they felt fear. But fear isn't there doing anything to them. They just lost the light, and when they couldn't see, they got scared. So we've got to think about the ego the same way. God doesn't create an ego. God gives us the ability to think whatever we want to think. And when we block God's truth about us, it activates fear. So for example, if we were all created to breathe, right? Everybody, that's an effortless thing. You don't have to think about it. If you hold your nose, you are going to, in time, experience some terror. God didn't tell you to hold your nose and experience suffering. So the ego is that we're holding our nose and creating our own suffering. So God does not create the thoughts that we're thinking that have us forget what we are. God gives us the ability to think whatever thought we want to have. And if we are choosing to block God, we're going to experience discomfort. Another analogy is we have light all the time. The sun is shining all the time. What we call darkness is not a source of darkness. There is not the dark ball out there sending us darkness and it covers the land. The reason we experience darkness is because there is a rotation that causes a block to the light. But you notice that when there is darkness on this side, there's light on the other, right? All of us know the sun is always there. We're just not experiencing it. So the ego is a block to the truth, like darkness is an absence of light. The ego is an absence of the truth in our mind. Does that make sense? So when you learn that breathing feels good and is natural, you let go of pinching your nose. When you understand that believing thoughts that cause you suffering are unnecessary, you'll stop using those thoughts, and then your mind aligns with God automatically. Just as when you let go of holding your nose, breathing is automatic. And understanding this is really key to really getting the essence of the Course in Miracles, because the Course wants us to experience the joy that we were created to experience. So in taking and dividing up God and looking at the properties of God, and I'm going to move back a little bit so I'm sure my voice will still travel. So when you look at that God is the essence of love, we have to begin to think of ourselves as energy. We are consciousness, we are pure energy. So the energy that love is, forever expanding, forever extending itself. Unconditional love sets no conditions, so it goes to everybody. That unconditional love is what is real. That is what God is. God is the energy of love forever expanding and extending itself and creating. Because it is one energy, it is oneness. And quantum physics is letting us know that we're made of energy. When we get comfortable that we're energy, and that's very offensive to the ego. What? I'm energy? No, I'm this solid, mass of bones and cells and whatever. But if you drill down into that, you will find that it is all made of energy. The benefit to understanding that we're made of energy is then it lets us understand the truth that God is. And the truth that God is that it is. There is no opposite to it. There is no up and down. There is only isness. And when you know that it is only isness, it is forever eternal. And that's why it is infinite. This energy is infinite. Forever there, expressing, extending. And because it is one, it experiences innocence because it doesn't know of anything other than love. And in its innocence, it means that there is no maliciousness. There can be nothing it would do to itself, which is why little children are so innocent. They haven't been trained into being mean and fearful and hurtful because they don't know themselves yet as separate. And that's why it experiences happiness. That's why joy is natural. Joy is a natural part of what God is. When we are enjoying life, we are actually in alignment with what God is because we're not blocking, we're not resisting, we're not stopping the flow of what we are. So if you know that that is God, then the ego is everything that is the opposite. And let me give you a real simple way of understanding how is it that we descended into the density of the ego. The ego is very dense thinking, and it is the very thing that has caused us to feel so tight and tense. That density is like a harnessing of the energy that we are, but not in a good way. It's what makes the energy that we are not flow freely, so it condenses and it densifies, and it's a source of our illnesses. So when you begin to understand that by blocking the flow of what we are makes us get sick, you're going to want to really get on board with understanding that what we are is love. Because when you tap into that awareness and you live your life from a state of I am energy, you will begin to direct your energy in the way that God intended it to be, which is extending, because love gives, unconditional love. And the reason the fear, that we feel fear is again because we have cut ourselves off with our thinking from the source of love. So it's a contraction from love, and of course you feel like you've separated from love, which is an illusion. It's not true. You cannot separate from what is one. If God is everything and we are in the mind of God, as the Course in Miracles tells us, we cannot be separate. So when you think that we're all energy, we are all inside of this one room. And whether we like it or not, the ego doesn't like this, our energy fields are intertwined with each other. So energetically, we are all one big, soup in here. And then this room is inside of this building, and this building's inside of this city, and the city is inside of this country. And when you begin to extend out, we are all contained inside of the one source. So there is no separation. There's only a perception for the purpose of enjoyment, because God can create whatever it wants. So when we train our mind to think with God, and we see each other as one, and we know the truth of ourselves, then we won't be in a state of fear, thinking what's not real, that you are separate, which then causes us to move into duality, because the ego, the thoughts, the egoic thoughts, are all about self-protection, because there are thoughts that emanate from our primitive brain. This is the thinking of protection, and if I have to protect myself, then I am going to be watching out for danger. To know that something is dangerous, I have to categorize it: good, bad, right, wrong. So the ego in the ego system, in thoughts of duality, are always going to be plus or minus, right or wrong. And the ego is always concerned, our egoic thoughts are always concerned with what is temporary because it's all that it knows. It only knows this life, birth to death. And of course that is scary because the idea of disappearing one day is very scary to in our way of thinking with the ego. But when you begin to accept that what we are is eternal, it's because we're an energy that cannot be affected. It can be condensed, but it cannot be affected. The worst we can do is densify, but we cannot affect it. Then the ego, it focuses on the body. Because of rights and wrongs, it begins the concept of sin. So this idea that we're bodies and some are good and some are bad creates that idea that has been used to keep a lot of people in line, this concept that we're sinners. And when you're believing that there's something wrong with you, that you're dirty, you carry all of this guilt, all of this shame. Those egoic thoughts, of course, block the light even more. The guiltier you feel, you think you are, the more tight and tense you're going to get. So that is the source of our suffering. So let's look at how this whole egoic thought system got created. And for that, we've got to go to the story of the fall from grace. Are you guys familiar with that story? It's a Christian-based story that we fell from grace. Well, this is what happened. God, in its infinite wisdom, loving every single one of us, said, well, let's explore. Let's in a state of wondering how else can I show up? And each and every one of us is God wanting to be uniquely each one of us. But then we have a decision. We have a thought that says, I am other than how God created me. And the reason we have that thought is because we can. Don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out the ego and how it got started, because that's the ego wanting to confuse you from knowing how it got started. And it got started by a decision to be other than love. That's all that it is. When we make that decision, we begin the process of falling from grace. We take the first step in blocking ourselves from knowing the truth. So think about that bridge that I've talked about, and then I'll explain how we're going to use the bridge now to return to the truth. But when we begin to have thoughts that block truth, those thoughts yield other thoughts, yield more thoughts, and create even more thoughts. So little by little by little, when we had that original thought, I am other than God, and I ate of the tree of knowledge, and I began to believe in duality. I began to believe that there's two of us, and I began to believe in separation. I begin the process of stepping, and this is over thousands of years, of stepping away from the truth. So I'm going to just kind of mark it here on the board. All that symbolizes is the thousands of years that we've been thinking thoughts that are not true. That's all that it is. So we have descended into the density of egoic thinking. So when I believe, and we've all been conditioned to believe that we are humans, we are not raised for the most part to believe that what we are is eternal energy. Now that is something that the Buddhists teach, the Hindus teach. I mean, you talk or even know about the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, they understand it's a reincarnation. So there is an eternalness that is understood, and the focus is what is this being going to do in this lifetime to bring more of the reality of God to the planet. So the mind is trained from a very young age to not think thoughts that are fear-based, but to think with thoughts that are of love. So when you are in the presence of a being that is loving, you don't feel threatened. You don't feel threatened because the density of the energy of fear is not present there. You can walk right into their space because it is loving, it is welcoming. It doesn't have thoughts that is sizing you up. Oh no, there they come, look at him, look at her, what are they going to do to me? Those thoughts are not in the mind. Therefore, the energy is free, it's clear, it's welcoming, it's a loving space, because they are letting their love expand, and we feel welcome, because that's what love does. Love accepts, because it is one. So it recognizes another as an expression of the same essence that it is. So tell me if that makes sense so far.
Yes.
Okay. So when we are in this journey of forgiveness according to the Course in Miracles, we are on a journey of returning. What we are doing is we fell asleep into the illusion that we're separate, and the forgiveness of the Course in Miracles is to recognize the truth. So it is a journey of returning. So we build our ego by leaving, by saying no to God. We basically turn our back to God. Then the journey of forgiveness is a returning to God. And every single experience that we have is an opportunity for that return. So when we are moving down this journey, we have to become self-aware. We have to become aware of the true self that we are, the higher self, the love that is inside of us. We're developing a relationship with that aspect of ourselves. But while we're developing a relationship with the truth of who we are bumping up against what is not true about us that we have been believing is who we are. And that's where we have to do the work of unpacking every single story that we hold about somebody has hurt me. Somebody did something that has affected me and made me scared and made me have to protect myself, defend myself. And it condenses us into being a very small idea of who we are. Tell me, does that make sense so far? Okay. So as we create an ego identity, we are adding thoughts that are not true, and because we keep thinking them, we keep believing them, they keep getting repeated. You know, when my mom calls me Laina, she is because to her I am a separate girl named Laina, and I'm her daughter. When you hear that over and over and over again, it forms an identity, and you think that that's what you are. How many of you walk around on a regular basis, please be honest, truly knowing that what you are is pure energy? No. How many of you walk around knowing that you are invulnerable because you are that infinite energy? Even less. Chances are probably not. You might from time to time, but if you walk out and you're afraid somebody's going to hit you, you don't know that you're energy and invulnerable. If you know somebody's going to hit your car, if you're worried about dying, you don't know you're invulnerable. If you're concerned that you're not going to have enough money to pay the bills, you're in fear, you don't know you're invulnerable. So when we are not thinking truth, we are actually solidifying what's not true. So the journey of forgiveness is literally a journey of forgiving every single thought that we're having that is not true. But here's what makes the Course in Miracles really very different from everything else. Not only does the Course tell you that you're forgiving something that is not true, but it is saying you're forgiving something that didn't even happen to you. And for that, your mind has to be ready to accept that. Because if you believe somebody hurt you, you're not going to acknowledge that that is not only not true, but that it didn't happen to you. And let's break that down, because that can be really confusing.